Everyone for joining us for today's farm management webinar. My name is Lacey Miller, and we appreciate you coming together to hear from Amy Johnson about legal issues. At this point, I will turn it over to Amy. Thank you.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon to everyone. I guess for some of us it's afternoon, for some of us it's still morning. I love seeing all the diversity and locations that we're joining in from. Wyoming, California, Kentucky, New Mexico, North Carolina, Northern Illinois. I am actually based in Des Moines, Iowa. Uh, I am going to share my screen here. I've got a PowerPoint for you all. Oh, is the PowerPoint showing up?
Yes, we see PowerPoint itself, but it's not in
Perfect.
presentation mode.
Well, let's try that. How's that look?
We don't see that. Do you have multiple screens?
I do. Let me see how to.
You may just need to select the other
Oh,
screen.
yeah. Let's try that. Let me get you back to the
Yep,
beginning here.
we, we see it.
Perfect. I apologize. I'm a little out of practice with Zoom. We all got so good at it back in 2020, and now my skills have fallen off a little bit, so I apologize.
There you go.
There we go. Like I said, my name is Amy Johnson. First, I want to thank ASF MRA so much for having me today and Lacey for coordinating. I am a mergers and acquisitions and agribusiness attorney at Brown Winick here in Des Moines, Iowa. For those of you maybe out west, Des Moines is right in the middle of the state. And here in Iowa, we like to kind of think of ourselves as the epicenter of agriculture. So my practice focuses on helping business in the agriculture industry, primarily navigating transactions, growth, risk management, and just legal issues that arise in operating in the rapidly changing environment that we're in. I spend a lot of my time working with producers, processors, a lot of family-owned, multi-generational operations. And many of the topics that we'll discuss today are issues I see clients dealing with in real time, from contracts and transportation, labor, succession planning, and regulatory challenges, all of those things. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and hope that we can. I think somebody said in the comments that they hope to take one thing away. So I hope we can at least do that. Just a little bit about myself. I am a native Iowa girl, grew up on 1,000 acres outside of our state capital here, Des Moines. My folks it was the 80s, to date myself a little bit. My folks had enrolled their farm in the CRP program, and we primarily operated as a hunting preserve. But that's my rural Iowa background. I went to a small college in Iowa, Central College in Pella, Iowa, a Dutch reform school where I played softball. And for the most part, I would say majored in that. And then I went to law school at Creighton University in Omaha. When I was at Creighton, I had the wonderful opportunity to do a summer clerkship here at Brown Winick back in 2006. And as part of that clerkship, there was a senior partner here at the firm that was working on what were called consent decrees with the EPA, and those related to air emissions from larger scale hog confinements. And they involved the daily reportable emissions of ammonia and hydrogen sulfide. And the belief at the time from the EPA was that just daily operation of those facilities could be potentially causing emissions that would exceed the reportable quantities for those two substances. And so, what the EPA sought to do that summer was to enter into these agreements with producers so that they could essentially come on to the producer's property to conduct better research to be able to better assess the emissions and determine whether or not those should be regulated at the federal level. And so that summer, we did over 500 of those consent agreements. And as part of that, each of those 500 sites or farms that we worked with executed those consent agreements. They paid a certain amount of money to the government. And in return, while this issue was pending, the EPA agreed not to sue under what EPCRA and CERCLA are the two federal air quality statutes that believed potentially could be triggered. And so between that project that summer, my background growing up in rural Iowa, and then just a strong personal connection with the senior partner that oversaw this practice, this is the way I decided to go. So here I am, exactly 20 years to the day, May 15, that I started at Brown Winick. I am presenting to you all on what some of these issues are that we're seeing today. So I like to start out, why is agriculture different? Because it is. It really is, and it has a unique set of issues that arise with it for a number of reasons. But when I look at the crux of it, it is because it's not just a business for people, it's a way of life, and it's a culture, and it's something much deeper than what and maybe it's personal bias, but it's something much deeper than what I think you see in a lot of businesses. And that does bring a unique set of circumstances. So just kind of how I would describe it generally is it's a unique combination of family ownership and transition, high capital intensity, you have commodity price volatility that you can't control, weather risk that you can't control, and constant regulatory oversight and changes that really can impact how we operate day to day and what our businesses look like or need to look like. So those are the things from my perspective that I think make agriculture different and a different industry that really needs to be serviced and needs to be addressed in a different way. So I'm going to go through and just generally talk about some of the overarching issues that I deal with folks on. And if there's any questions, please feel free to pop in with those. I want this presentation to fit what you all are looking for, and I'd be really happy to address any questions that you have as we go through here. So the first issue, and part of this is with the type of clientele that I serve, my location, et cetera, but business structure and ownership issues. And we see those on a daily basis. And there's a number of factors that go into these decisions. And, some of them are unique to ag. So, for example, choosing the right entity. Here in Iowa and in many states, there are limitations on corporate ownership or foreign investor ownership in agricultural land. And so, particularly from the corporate ownership perspective, choosing the right entity can be a critical decision for that reason. That is unique to agriculture. Other considerations that go into that choosing the right entity that are not unique to ag necessarily, but that are still critical would be liability protection, tax implications, succession planning, which is hugely important, as we talked about on the last slide. And something that makes agriculture unique is that you do have a lot of multi-generational families that are working on succession. You'll see I included a lot of quotes in here that are just different quotes that I kind of enjoy or that I think accurately reflect the industry. But the traditional farm family retirement isn't really a word that's in their vocabulary. But with the increasing size of operations, it's really a conversation that needs to be broached. And it's something that I'm seeing as a huge spike in my practice area is succession planning. And how is that generational transition going to happen? How are we going to transfer that wealth? How are we going to transfer that knowledge? How are we going to smoothly transition ownership, management, day-to-day operations, etc.? Governance and decision making is a big part in choosing an entity structure. And then obviously investor and lender expectations. And that is one critically important, as all of us on this call probably know. The ag lending is alive and well, and a huge part of almost every operation that we see out there. And the most successful farming operations that I see or agricultural business operations that I see are those that communicate openly, clearly, frequently with their lenders. And there is a tremendous set of lenders in the farm credit system across the United States. And from a practical takeaway perspective, I know that's a point later on. But what I advise my clients, what I would encourage anyone in this business to do is communicate with those lenders early, often, clearly, um, particularly if you think that there's a problem on the horizon. The sooner you let them know about that, the more likely they are going to be to work with you. And the level of trust is just going to increase with that transparency. So that's a key point that I want to make when we talk about investor and lender expectations. Um, Common issues that I see in choosing, the right entity or business structure would be lack of formal agreements, formal operating agreements or bylaws regarding governance of the entity, regarding the sharing of profits and losses, um, ownership disputes, minority owner issues, all of those type of things, those common problems that you see with entities can be addressed up front. In an LLC structure, I think having a clear operating agreement that very succinctly outlines the process for decision making, decisions that require a greater level of input from owners or a board of directors, if there is one. Clear delineation on the sharing of profits and losses or lack thereof. Having those clear and concise in your operating agreement, if you're an LLC, in your bylaws or your shareholder agreement, if you're using a corporate structure, or in your partnership agreement if you're using that type of a structure. And I will say that that is another aspect of agriculture that is unique. We do see more partnerships than what we would see in other industries. I know at my firm here, I'm kind of considered the partnership expert, if for no other reason than ag entities just use them a lot. And there's several different reasons for that. Number one, maybe first and foremost, is farm program payments and utilizing the um, payment limitation availability of partners. Another one that I see, particularly here in Iowa and some of the other states where there is corporate ownership limitation. Um, in Iowa, we have a particular opportunity for limited partnerships to own ag land that isn't there for other entity types. So that is another area that's unique to ag is the use of partnerships. Now, there are pluses and minuses with that. The taxation of those entities is fairly clear, and a lot of us have gotten used to it in the context of the LLC structure, which also uses the same type of pass-through taxation. But depending on the type of partnership entity you set up, you can lack some of the liability protection that you would get from other entity types. Um, now, there are different types of partnerships: general partnerships, limited liability partnerships. And each of those entities is treated differently for farm program purposes, for corporate ownership purposes. And so thinking through what works best for you and your goals for your operation is critical in that. But I will say the use of partnerships is definitely more prevalent in the ag industry than it is in other industries. Um, I guess the practical takeaway, and I didn't include this quote explicitly on any of my slides, but uh, the good documents preserve good relationships. And that's akin to what I said about transparency and communication with your lenders. Transparency and communication with your partners, with your co-investors, with your family, um, through the use of good, clear, concise documents can help, maybe more than anything else, avoid some of the consternation and litigation and disputes that we often see come out of some of these entity types. It's a lot easier to negotiate some of those things up front than it is later on when some kind of an issue has arisen that's going to require it, whether it's a death in the family, a death of a partner or investor, whether it's a difficult economic time that's resulting in a request for personal guarantees or for a different type of relationship, whatever it is. It's a lot easier to discuss those issues up front and make a better informed strategy than it is to be reactive when those types of situations arise. So good documents preserve good relationships, and I am a huge believer in that. Land issues and real estate concerns. This is obviously in agriculture a huge component of what we do, particularly from a row crop perspective. Uh, we also have it from a livestock perspective to a certain extent. As I mentioned, here in Iowa, we have um, corporate ownership limitations through the use of certain qualified entities. You can own a certain amount of ag land in Iowa, but maintaining, there's limitations on the acres, limitations on who the qualified owners are, different components like that. And that goes back a little to the entity choice, but land specific issues and real estate concerns. Leases obviously are a huge component, whether it's row crop or livestock. I have up here written versus oral leases. Um, Oral leases are just not a good idea from my perspective. It's difficult to prove what the terms are. It's difficult to prove whether or not it was terminated. In some instances, oral leases aren't enforceable at all. In most instances, oral leases are not going to be enforceable if the term exceeds 1 year. So strongly advise written leases as they relate to whatever agricultural property you're dealing with, whether it's row crop, hog barns, feedlots, whatever it is. Get those leases in writing. Termination requirements. In an effort to protect farmers, which we all appreciate, there are statutory termination requirements for agricultural leases in many places. For example, in Iowa, you are required to terminate a farm lease in writing that has to be served or mailed via certified mail before September 1. for the following crop year. So that is critically important, and intuitively it makes a lot of sense. You don't want a farmer spending a lot of money with inputs, keeping up the ground, whatever it is, to then just have uh, the wool pulled over his eyes or the rug pulled out from under him, and end up in a situation where they can't have the value of those implements because a lease was terminated too late. So it's a statute. It's a statute here in Iowa and in other states where there are clear requirements for terminating a farm lease. In Iowa, you really don't mess with that. If you're going to terminate a farm lease, you're going to give written notice of termination. That written notice of termination is going to be delivered prior to September 1, and it's pretty critically important. And I emphasize prior to because there actually is case law in Iowa that if that notice is even delivered on September 1, that's a problem. That does not comply with the statute, and that's very clear. So I make it very clear to my team that if we're terminating farm leases in Iowa, it has to be done before September 1. Um, Hunting and recreational rights, as I talked about, this one's a little bit near and dear to me based on my upbringing, but you will see folks, obviously, that want to use their ground for some different purposes, depending on when the crops are in and out. I do a fair number of hunting leases. With those, I mean, the critical part is just the shift of liability. You want to make sure that the folks that are using your ground are liable for their own decisions, for you are, you know, kind of freeing yourself of any, if somebody falls in a hole and breaks their leg, if a expensive hunting dog gets caught in a fence, something like that. You want to make sure that you've properly outlined that allocation of liability and risk and associated things before you allow people to recreational activities on your ground. One piece of advice that I would also highlight there is that uh, the level of care that's required of a landowner in those type of situations is going to vary based on whether or not how the people using the land were classified, and how the people using the land are classified largely depends on whether or not you're charging them for use. And I think it stands to reason that if you are charging people to use your land for hunting or other recreational purposes, you are going to have a higher standard of care than someone who allows his or her buddy to come out and hunt deer every year without paying for it. So just an issue to be aware of. Drainage and tile issues. Those over the course of the last several years have been a very, very hot button issue in my neck of the woods. There was a substantial lawsuit by the city of Des Moines Waterworks here in Des Moines where they were trying to get drainage tile to be classified as a point source. And that was unsuccessful to date, but I think drainage and tile issues are going to continue to be at the forefront of people's minds, particularly in this part of the country where we have a lot of row crop, where we use a lot of commercial fertilizer, and where water quality issues are at the forefront of folks' minds, particularly in some of the more urban areas. So drainage and tile issues, something to watch out for in the future. Agricultural contracts and commercial disputes. This is really my bread and butter. This is where I spend the vast majority of my time. Um, Obviously, there are a variety of different types of agricultural contracts, different types of commercial disputes that are going on at any point in time. Um, Grain contracts are obviously always a source of these types of disputes or contract interpretation. I actually have a really interesting matter that's pending right now. We have a situation where treated beans were mixed with untreated beans, and how we're going to take care of that, and how we're going to ensure that the co-op gets properly compensated for that happening. And I was pleasantly surprised that this was a new relationship for me, but um, the co-op had excellent contracts and well-defined allocation of risk that are going to make that much better, a much better situation for them than if they didn't have those. So that's one area. Livestock agreements. These, can be anything from livestock facility leases. I do a lot of contract finishing agreements related to hog barns. Being in Iowa, I think I said earlier in the call that this is the epicenter of agriculture. It's very definitely the epicenter of the hog world. And so, contract finishing agreements, swine management agreements, those type of things have been a critical part of my practice for many years now. The biggest change to those agreements is now fairly stale, but those would have been implemented back with the 2008 Farm Bill. And if any of you work in livestock, you'll remember this because essentially what that required was that most livestock agreements now have to include certain statements such as large capital expenditures may be required of the grower during the term of this agreement. And again, not unlike what we talked about earlier with the goal being to protect the farmer. The goal with some of that language and some of the requirements that came on back then was to protect the grower, protect the smaller farmers, the smaller operators. But livestock agreements are critical. Equipment and input agreements, obviously, as long as there's farms, as long as there's crops, as long as there's livestock, there needs to be equipment and there needs to be inputs. And so those are frequent. Equipment, it's usually in the form of a lease or a purchase agreement. Input agreements, kind of same thing. More often you'll see kind of terms and conditions of sale associated with the purchase of inputs. On both of those, the thing I think that I would emphasize are, making sure that whatever you buy is free and clear of liens, making sure that, if you expect some warranty of condition or ability to use or whatever, that's clearly delineated. But those are frequently addressed. Transportation and logistics agreements. Transportation has been a huge issue for a number of my clients over the last several years. It's just with the primary driver of that being a lack of drivers, pun not intended, but I'm actually pretty proud of that now that I said it. So transportation and logistics are hugely important. It's we're dealing with in most instances, perishable commodity. So having transportation when you need it is critical. This and hopefully you don't mind me telling a few war stories, but I just looked at this issue within the last couple of months for a company that they were selling newly hatched chicks. And as we have in Iowa, in the Midwest, as well as, some of you that are out in the Pacific Northwest, it looks like, or the Northeast, you're going to have weather issues. There's going to be a storm that comes through, a blizzard that comes through, a derecho, whatever it is, that's going to keep trucks off the road. And allocating the risk associated with that, particularly when you do have a perishable commodity, is very important. And making sure that you have the protections in place, whether you're the buyer or the seller in that instance, is critical. And like I said, just looked at that and worked with a client. Thankfully, they were proactive in their approach. They didn't wait for there to be a problem. They identified that problem ahead of time, and we put in place some policies I think will allow them some comfort in how they treat those circumstances. Just having clear policies and procedures in place, making sure that you follow those policy and procedures, and eliminating that liability and allocating that responsibility in those situations. Um, as far as key contract drafting concepts, I would say that, you want to be clear, you want to be concise, you want it to be readable. Um, Sometimes, particularly early in my career, I would get long contracts with lots of legalese, and they're difficult to understand. They're difficult to understand when you have a law degree. They're difficult to understand. I mean, they're not readable. They're not useful. Um, I would encourage concise contracts with clear language that are readable and understandable to everyone involved, because that's what's going to eliminate the most disputes. Um, Now, you're going to have the lawyers, the people who want to solve for every issue in the contract, and maybe in a perfect world we do that. I think it's more important that you have a clear and concise statement of your agreement that allows a framework for your relationship. And that is what I would focus on, is making sure that everyone can clearly understand what it is supposed to be, rather than solving for every possible issue and ending up with an agreement that's so long and so difficult that no one is going to be able to understand it, and especially not a judge who maybe has no experience in agriculture, who didn't have the benefit of the background on the contract, and then you put a 90-page contract in front of them. I promise you, it's going to be a lot easier to explain if you've put your contract together in a clear and concise manner. So that's my kind of key drafting concept there. I will, and again, if there's any questions, I don't see any popping up, but like I said, my Zoom skills have been somewhat depleted in the last 6 years. So maybe if Lacey sees one, jump in here and let me know. But um, agricultural contracts and commercial disputes, employment and labor issues. Okay. I think we all know that these are some of the most impactful issues that the ag industry is facing at this point, at this juncture. Um, Workforce challenges in agriculture are real. They are significant, and they are going to continue. Um, what I would say is that, finding a workforce is problem number one, or issue number one. Once you find them, making sure that you've taken the proper steps to ensure that those people are properly documented in the United States. Either they are citizens, they are non-resident aliens, they are here on an appropriate visa. That's going to be very critical. And what I would tell you is, this is not an area, immigration in particular, is not an area in which a lawyer should dabble. Okay? This is an area in which you need a specialist. I am not a specialist. My firm has specialists in this area, but I am not. And this is not an area where you want to deal with someone who is not a specialist. Immigration, there is a reason that immigration reform is a bipartisan. The need for immigration reform is bipartisan. How that immigration reform is implemented, obviously, is not. But immigration laws are difficult to navigate, they are burdensome, and they require the help of a specialized expertise. So that would be the best advice I could give you there, is this is not an issue for your small town lawyer. This is not an issue for anyone that's not a specialist in immigration law. Wage and hour compliance is an issue as old as time, and it's one that endures more robustly than most. And what I mean by that is, wage and hour compliance is one that, even after, for example, you have employees that you have inappropriately classified for wage and hour purposes. even if you sell your business, even if the buyer of your business agrees that it is going to take on liability, even if you have a purchase agreement that says that, that wage and hour liability can and will still stay with you as the seller. That wage and hour compliance is serious business. The implications, the penalties for it are serious and it does not go away. So I would encourage you to be diligent in those factors and employ the proper personnel to make sure those things are done correctly, or engage a lot of folks that I work with outsource those types of issues to ensure that they're done properly. Workplace safety. Obviously, we're in industries where that's a concern every single day. Um, I have a client that um, they manufacture um, a soil amendment that helps soil maintain its moisture. And from a workplace safety perspective, they are by far the best I've ever seen. They are the gold standard. They make it a part of their daily routine. It is part of their culture. And if you can do that, that's amazing. And what I would say is if you talk about it, if you reinforce it, if you make it a part of who you are as an organization, it will show and you will have fewer OSHA violations. You will have fewer visits from OSHA. You will have um, fewer, uh, I am at a loss for words. You will be in a better position if you can put some focus and some emphasis on safety. Not to mention, obviously, people are our greatest asset, and we want that regardless. Um, Harassment and culture issues, those are real, those are prevalent, and they need to be addressed. Workplace harassment is it's an issue that you see. Um, More than I would like to admit, but having good policies in place, well-written policies, whether it's a standalone policy or a policy in your employee handbook that you follow, is critically important to both harassment and culture issues. And I emphasize when you follow because what I will see from time to time is companies, businesses that will have the most wonderful harassment policy in place, but they don't abide by it or they don't follow it. And while a good policy that is well executed is great protection, a policy that is not executed is no protection. So it does not do any good to have the harassment policy or whatever the other workplace culture type policies are in place if you are not going to follow them, if you are not going to defend your culture, if you are not going to protect your people in that regard, those policies will not protect you either. So get the policies, get them in place, and follow them. Environmental and regulatory compliance. This goes back to the story I kind of told at the beginning with the EPA and that DNR oversight. Again, I'm drawing on my experience here in the state of Iowa, but DNR oversight is a huge part of our regulatory environment. I deal with that organization on a regular basis. In Iowa, I think they do an outstanding job. They are willing to work with producers, and I would echo the same advice that I give when it comes to your lender. I like to be over communicative. I like to be collaborative, and I like to working with a regulator is a lot easier than having to work against a regulator. And the earlier that you get them engaged, the more likely you are to be working with them. Um, Probably some of my favorite memories as a lawyer over the last 20 years have been my interactions in Iowa, it's called the EPC, the Environmental Protection Committee. And we had a client that was expanding its livestock facilities here in the state. And we look at them, the Iowa DNR employs a tool called the Master Matrix for purposes of siting hog facilities. And there's an opportunity for the DNR to score that matrix. There's an opportunity for the county to look at that. And then if there's a disagreement, it's generally decided by the Environmental Protection Committee. And I have in multiple instances stood and argued before that um, entity as to why sites complied with the matrix, why they were scored appropriately by the DNR or scored inappropriately by the DNR. And I will tell you, those are public hearings, and there is a diverse group that turns out for them. But um, having success in those situations and being able to advocate for the producers that I represent in that type of a setting, in that type of an adversarial place, it's really pretty remarkable. But EPA and DNR oversight, work with them, not against them. Pesticide and chemical compliance, obviously, this becomes more critical every year, really, and I think is going to continue to be a hot button issue, particularly in states where water quality is a concern. And then food safety. Food safety is always going to be an issue as well. Our greatest asset, like I said, is our people, and we need to make sure that those folks are protected. So food safety is going to be at the forefront. One issue I didn't put on here, and I should have, was animal welfare. I do a lot with animal welfare policies and compliance with animal welfare policies in response to those types of issues. Again, if you take one thing today, if you have policies, that's great, but they are only valuable if you comply with them, if you hold your people to the standards that you've set forth in them. Otherwise, they are not worth the paper they are written on. So um, that is kind of the general gist of what I wanted to talk about today. I would love to answer any questions or if there's anything you think I left out that you'd like me to touch on quickly. Oh, there was a question submitted, and I did want to address it. It had to do with liability for appraisers. And a couple points, just kind of from a risk mitigation perspective for those folks, keep a robust file, um, document what you've worked on, document why you made your decision. If there's anything you have to support that decision, keep that in your file. Um, Make sure that you have a clearly defined scope of engagement. That can help as well. Again, I go back to what I said earlier, which is a concise, readable document that both sides can understand is far more valuable than something that provides for every potential nuance of the relationship. Um, you can have limitations of liability in your contract that you sign with them. That would be another option. And then obviously not telling you anything you don't know, but insurance is always going to be critical and a huge part of what you need to be doing. But with that, I will stop sharing. And if there's any questions, I think I want to be very respectful of your time, but I think we have about 10 minutes if anybody has anything or anything else they want me to touch on or.
Yeah, that's right. Please feel free to come back on camera and unmute yourself.
I will tell you this, the weather is absolutely perfect in Des Moines today. My former mentor would call it Chamber of Commerce weather. So I know there's lots of fields getting out planted today. So that's pretty exciting. And yeah, anything else that we haven't touched on, I'd be more than happy to. But I certainly appreciate your time and attention. And again, Lacey, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. My light in my office turns off if you don't move enough in a certain amount of time.
I'm trying to practice wait time. But while we wait, I will let you know that we do have more webinars coming up. Next week, May 21st, we have an agricultural consulting webinar coming up, Environmental Law and the Farm. Please check that out and register if you haven't. The link to our education calendar is posted now in the chat. And then our next farm management webinar will be June 5th. Also at 11 a.m. you can register. Oh, yes, 11. Register for that using the same education link. We'll give it maybe one more minute in case anyone has a question.
That
Amy, can you hear me?
I can, yes. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah. Do you have much experience with solar leases?
So me personally, no. My firm, yes. We have an energy group here and they do a ton of that work. My experience with that and my involvement has been pretty limited. But obviously it's a huge movement in ag right now. It's an opportunity, especially for folks that maybe don't have the highest quality ground, or maybe they just have proximity to transmission lines or whatever it is. It's a huge opportunity. Brian, if it's something you're interested in and have questions about, I'd be more than happy to put you in touch with the folks at my firm that do more substantive work in that area.
And yeah, it's hard to get into a lot of specifics. I guess one overarching question I've always had on this, and always appreciate people's opinion, is how do you protect against the 100-year hailstorm or something of that nature? There's liability that says, yeah, they've got to clean things up, but that's easy to say until it's whatever, shards of plastic and fiberglass and everything else in the ground from a huge hailstorm and such. So just curious if you or your partners have any particular thoughts on that.
That's a great question. And if anybody couldn't hear Brian, because he is a little bit softer spoken, but the question had to do with these kind of um, extraordinary weather events, the large scale hailstorm, or we had in Iowa a few years ago, it's called a derecho, which is just an extremely strong straight line wind. Um, that did a ton of damage and kind of how do you account for those things in your solar leases. And I think there's certainly those um, items are addressed in the lease, weather items are addressed in the lease, damage to the equipment is addressed in the lease. Force majeure clauses are critically important for things like that. For those of you that don't know what those are, a force majeure clause is essentially a clause in a contract that gives you an out if there's an act of God that prohibits you from being able to perform. I would like to say that those are not often employed, and I think historically that has been the case. But anybody that was around in 2020, particularly in the livestock industry, when processing plants couldn't operate and hogs were getting too big and the livestock industry was really in pretty critical peril. Those force majeure clauses were very, very important. And there was, for something that you kind of prior to 2020 skimmed over in a contract and didn't give much thought to, they really became very critical pieces. So I would say, particularly because, and I don't know the reason, but it seems like we're having more of those extraordinary weather events than usual. I feel like we've had a number of 100-year floods here in Iowa since in my less than 100 years of living. So I think paying some attention to that force majeure clause is important, making sure you have proper insurance coverage. That's actually, I would give a little plug on that. Um, I see that is a differentiator for ag business. If you use insurance broker that is knowledgeable in ag, that is a differentiator. I would strongly recommend if you don't use a broker that specializes in ag or even a level further that specializes in if you're a livestock producer, if you're a row crop farmer, um, those folks bring tremendous value to the people that they represent. So I would strongly encourage if you don't already use a broker with some very robust ag knowledge, I would recommend that.
Thanks, appreciate it.
I don't know if Larissa is still on, but I'd love to know if she gained anything so we could call it a win today. I love the comment.
Yeah, I'm still on. I appreciate it. It was good information and I think a definite win. So thank you a lot for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for being a good sport with that too.
Okay. With that, I think we are good to call it a day. Thank you so much, Amy, for your time. Thank you for this wonderful presentation, and thank you